Yo, welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today we have first of all, happy to be back. We haven't done an IRL in a couple weeks. I think the last guest was Parker Lewis. We have a very special guest lined up for you guys today, the author of The Bullish Case for Bitcoin and also fellow coworker with me over at Swan Bitcoin. We have Vijay Boyapati. I'm super excited for this episode. Vijay, we just crossed paths in California, man. It was super awesome to see you, and now it's super awesome to work with you as well. So how you doing, man?
Yeah, I had a great time at Bitcoin, and it was great doing a panel with you. I guess it wasn't a panel; it was kind of a fun game. Um, but yeah, I'm super excited to be part of Swan. And honestly, Pacific Bitcoin, I didn't say this, but it just occurred to me. The feeling I had when I was there was the same feeling I had at the first Bitcoin conference I went to, which was almost exactly 10 years ago. The first Bitcoin conference I went to was in 2013 in San Jose. It was just the Bitcoin conference. It was just called the Bitcoin conference. There wasn't really any other conferences. There were no shitcoin conferences. It was just the Bitcoin conference, and I just remember the sense of excitement, just how cool this was. Like this, people were just discovering Bitcoin and are like, this could potentially change the world. I got that same kind of sense of excitement at Pacific Bitcoin and just the sense of fun as well, which is really awesome.
Yeah. It was. I never forgot the Pacific Bitcoin, and I felt that energy too, and I've heard that from multiple people, and I never forgot last year where price of Bitcoin was sitting at like $16,000, and you have Michael Saylor sitting in front row watching every single panel. This guy's down billions of dollars, right? And he's just cool headed, looking at the panel, trying to have a good time, talking to other Bitcoiners. So that feeling, that energy, I don't know if it's the airplane hangar or the way that Swan throws these events. They're very very special. They're homey in a way, and I think and I love the Bitcoin conferences, but maybe it's the size, like the Bitcoin conference is thrown by Bitcoin Magazine. Maybe it's the size. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's that California feeling. I don't know, but I know exactly what you're talking about when you say that. It's definitely a very very special event. So your presentation on stage was absolutely epic because you started to undress yourself. And what I mean by that is you took off your sweater and you showed something. It was a pretty epic introduction for you joining Swan. So my question is, why did you join Swan in the first place? What made you want to work here or work there?
Oh, that is a good question. Well, the way it happened, I'll just tell a brief story. I got an email from Corey, obviously the CEO of Swan. I got an email from him out of the blue saying, I want to chat with you. And it was on a Friday. And I said, I'm taking the kids camping. I can't do a call right now. And he said, okay, Monday. And I took the call, Zoom call on Monday. And I thought he was going to ask me about like Swan might be raising some money. It's a great company. Or maybe he was going to invite me to Pacific Bitcoin or something like that. But when I got on the call, he was on the call with Jan as well, which surprised me a little bit. And I was like, what's going on here? And he asked me about how my job was going. And he asked about a company that I didn't work for anymore because I didn't keep LinkedIn updated. I didn't really use LinkedIn. So I had like a job listed on there from like 7 years ago. And he was like, how's that going? And I was like, I don't really work there anymore. And he said, well, we want to just take a shot and see if you want to work at Swan. And I was so blown away. I did not expect that at all. I had expected an invitation to Pacific Bitcoin to speak or something like that. Um, and I thought, that's interesting. Let me find out about Swan. I knew Swan was Bitcoin only, and I knew what the business generally was, but I didn't know that much, and I didn't know exactly who worked there. And so I spent the next week or two just speaking with people at Swan, and I was honestly blown away. Like the team that Corey and Jan and Brady have put together is awesome, and the philosophy of like this is a Bitcoin company. We're all Bitcoiners. There's no non-Bitcoiners. It's like Corey told a funny story actually. He was like, we were interviewing this engineering candidate who's like pretty good, And one of the questions he had was, "What's your favorite Stefan Livera episode?" And the person didn't know the podcast, and Corey's like, "No, no, 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 we're not hiring them." So it's like really hardcore. It's like this is a Bitcoin only company, and I thought that was so cool because I've been interested in Bitcoin for a long time now, since 2011. Um, and I've always been supportive of the companies in the space, but to be able to work at one and to be surrounded by Bitcoiners and people who love Bitcoin, and to be able to hang out with you and folks like you is just, it's honestly a dream for me to be able to join Swan. So that's how I ended up at Swan.
Yeah, man, that's so. First of all, that backstory is super interesting. Yeah, it's a company full of Bitcoiners, complete on the mission. It's a Bitcoin only company, right? So yeah, it's and it's what you said. It's an incredible group of extremely talented Bitcoiners, hardcore Bitcoiners that are totally on the mission. So it's super happy to I'm super happy to have you, like, part of the fold, part of the family. And yeah, man, upwards and onwards. Anyways, man, so you did a presentation on the bullish case for Bitcoin. That's what you're known for. I think it was Michael Saylor, please correct me if I'm wrong, VJ, that wrote the preface to this incredible article that eventually became a book, right? Which is absolutely insane. When you wrote that initially, and it's been a while now since it was first released, did you have any inclination? Because sometimes I'll make a video. So I love making content. I love making videos. And sometimes when I make a video or when I title something properly, I have there's a little voice in the back of my head that's like, this is going to pop off. I'm very confident about that. You don't know to what extent, but you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure this one's going to do really well. That being said, did you have any idea that article, that Medium article that then became a book, was just going to blow everyone's minds away?
Not at all, not at all. And I mentioned this at the start of my talk at Pacific Bitcoin. I said, I honestly thought that it would be read by a few friends and family members, people who knew me and knew that I was really into Bitcoin and probably getting annoyed at me talking about Bitcoin all the time. I think I did have a little bit of hope that it would be maybe read by a few people outside of my friends and family circle. And I was hoping, like, my big hope was maybe a few people on Wall Street will read this and it'll click for them. And they'll be like, oh, I get it. This isn't Beanie Babies or something like that. There's something fundamental here that's really important. And it would click for a few people. I had no idea what happened would happen. None at all. Um, and it's been read over 1 million times. It's been translated, and not by me, but by volunteers into 20 different languages. Um, I think it hit on a nerve because people at the time were trying to understand, like, this was the I started writing it in the beginning of 2017, and I'm a really slow writer, and I only published at the beginning of 2018. But I think at the time it hit a nerve because people really wanted to understand Bitcoin. That was the first wave of, like, regular people coming to Bitcoin. Before that, it was kind of like a libertarian cypherpunk thing. It wasn't like not that many regular people cared about Bitcoin. I think 2017 was the first wave of regular people. Um, and there was just a lot of interest, like, what is this thing? Why is it becoming so valuable? And so I think I had been thinking about it since 2011. I have a background in Austrian economics, and I put a lot of thought into, like, why does this have value? To me, that's the most important question. Why does it have any value? Why is it more than zero? And I think there's, like, a good economic argument for why it does, and that's what I put into my article. I think it hit a nerve because people were trying to answer that exact same question, like, why does this thing have value? And then it just got, a momentum of its own, and it got shared around a lot, and was mentioned in some media and podcasts and stuff like that, and it kind of blew up, and then people started translating it, and it's in 20 different languages. So yeah, it got a momentum of its own, and the doing the book was an interesting thing because I was like, people kept asking me to turn it into a book because they were literally physically printing it out and giving it to people. Like, hey, Bitcoiners like to evangelize a little bit because they've discovered something important. They want other people to know about it. And so they were printing out my article and they're like, can you just turn it into a book so I can give them a book? It looks better if it's a book. I was like, oh, I don't really want to do that because like I don't know what I'd want to add to the article. I don't want to just like type the article into a book and publish it. But a few years later, a bunch of stuff had happened. The pandemic had happened, and the Federal Reserve had gone completely crazy and created trillions of dollars in new money. And I thought, okay, there's some new stuff that I want to revisit and I could add to the article. And so the book is quite a bit expanded. It's like, it has like a bunch of stuff that's not in the article. And I revisited that in 2021. And the funny thing is, when I launched it and I started selling it, I remember going to the Swan Dome at the Miami Bitcoin conference, and I've had this relationship with Swan for a while actually, where like I really like the Swan people and like hanging out with them. And I remember basically launching my book in the Swan Dome when it was like 100 degrees out, and inside the dome it was like probably 120 degrees, and it was a madhouse in there. It was like hundreds of people. There was a line outside the Swan Dome. It blows my mind because this is not my background. I'm not an author. I don't consider myself an author. I'm not an economist by training. I'm an engineer by training, and a pretty introverted engineer. So the attention it's got has been way beyond what I thought would happen.
Yeah, no, and well deserved, I might add. That's an incredible piece. I remember when I read it for the first time, it really, really resonated with me. And I remember that Swan Dome. That was Bitcoin 2021. They set up the Swan Dome outside. That's when they threw the conference not on Miami Beach, but in Wynwood. Yeah, and fast forward a couple years later, you could have never have imagined, myself included, very similar story, I might add, right? Kind of back and forth with Corey for a while. And then one thing led to another. Now, my question to you is, Vijay, so you wrote this piece. Things have obviously changed, right? I think things have changed for the better, whether, the change of the FASB accounting rules, whether it's the BlackRock ETF, whether it's these large banks that are filing or applying for licenses to custody Bitcoin for their clients, right? You have this, you kind of, one of the narratives in 2017, one of the coping narratives, right, when the 2018 bear market hit, was the institutions are coming, and that was all bullshit back then. You can't say that isn't true anymore. There's clearly institutional interest. Gary Gensler was absolutely grilled in Congress. It's by Tom Emmer and a bunch of other representatives. And they absolutely massacred it. I felt bad for the guy. Oh, I almost felt bad for the guy, better said. And yeah, so it's definitely been a long time. A lot of things have happened since you've written the piece. What has changed in your perspective? Did you think that all of this would have happened as soon as it happened?
That's a good question. I think the market in general is just so much more mature than it was, and I think you're right. The institutional interest has definitely appeared in real life, and I think that's basically organic. I think it's not because the institutions recognize, hey, we should be doing something with Bitcoin just on their own. It's because their clients were asking them that. It was because they were getting so much interest from their regular customers saying, can you provide me with a Bitcoin product here? Because I want to invest in Bitcoin. How do I invest in Bitcoin? They didn't have anything. They didn't have any offerings. So a lot of these banks and now BlackRock are looking at that and saying, our clients want this. We need to do something here. So I think that came organically. It didn't come because they had like this moment of insight or reflection. So I also don't want to give those institutions too much credit. I think also the big difference that I feel from between now and 2017 is I don't have any real worry about Bitcoin surviving. 2017 was actually a really worrying year for me. You probably remember the block size wars. It was the one time I was like, Bitcoin's survival is at stake right now because the biggest, most powerful companies in the space are trying to change Bitcoin in a way that it would basically become what Ethereum is. It's just a piece of software that you can change and twiddle with, and like it doesn't have that core property of immutability. Like, this can't be tampered with. The fact that it can't be tampered with is really what gives Bitcoin so much power, because it can't be bent, it can't be manipulated, the supply can't be changed. And we've never really had in the history of humanity an institution, a monetary institution that can't be tampered with. So I was worried in 2017, and that concern after the block size wars and the fact that the biggest companies in the space and the biggest miner and some of the biggest holders in the space couldn't change Bitcoin. That gave me so much confidence and peace of mind that this isn't gonna die. For me, I already believe that Bitcoin is a permanent institution in the world in the same way that most people believe the internet's a permanent institution. I just can't imagine a world where we don't have the internet unless it's like, game over, a comet has hit the earth and we're knocked back to like pre-civilization. I think the internet's a permanent institution in the world, and I think Bitcoin is too. I think the rest of the world probably has another decade or so to catch up to that belief, where people are like, yep, Bitcoin's not going anywhere, it's sticking around. And I'm talking about, the vast majority of people, that there is a pretty significant number of people out there who already believe this, but there's still like, the late majority in terms of the adoption curve. They still need to figure this out. This is like the internet's not going away because the world needs it, and it's going to be so entrenched that everyone's going to have some Bitcoin and keep savings in Bitcoin.
So it's really interesting what you said about the adoption on the adoption curve. You think we're already at the early majority stage?
Oh, no, 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 no. I should no. We're before that. What's the one before the early majority?
Innovators.
Innovators, yeah. I
Yeah.
think we're somewhere in that innovators stage. Um, the early majority and the late majority, there's still like, I don't know what it is in the world, probably 95% of the world still needs to figure this out, because your mindset changes, right? When you think, okay, Bitcoin's never going away, it's never going to be tampered with. So what's its value then? If you combine those two things, that it's never going away and people can't tamper with it, it's hugely valuable. Uh, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, I would say we're still somewhere in the early adopters phase, maybe like a quarter of the way through early adopters. There's still a lot of people who haven't figured Bitcoin out. But literally billions of people haven't figured it out.
So what you're saying is that we're not late to Bitcoin. What would you say to, like, because this is one of the also the another narrative, VJ, and I think a lot of people don't understand. And my piece of advice is, look, guys, back in 10 years ago when the price of Bitcoin was like $100, if I would have told you the price of Bitcoin would have been $26,000, you would have laughed me out of the room, right? I think a lot of people feel like they've missed the boat. A lot of people feel like they've missed the party.
Yeah.
And for the last 5 years, a lot of people also believe that the exponential gains are behind us, and the opportunity is gone. What would your response be to them? Because we have in a way, this is the first cycle where the price of Bitcoin went below the previous all-time highs, and I think that unsettled a lot of people when we broke below 20K. Well, are we still early? Is there still opportunity in Bitcoin if people are looking to invest or keep their savings in there? What would your response to them be?
I think one thing I like to point out to people is that no matter when you buy Bitcoin, and this is true for absolutely everyone, you feel like you're late. And that was true for me, when I got my first Bitcoin when they were like $10 or something like that. And it's like, because everyone just looks at the past. And there's a term for this. It's called path dependence. Your view about the value of something that's path dependent is based on what the price was before. And you look at it and you're like, oh man, I bought Bitcoin for $10, but it was like just 6 months ago, it was like 50 cents. So I'm buying the top. People who bought it 100 felt the same way. People who bought it 1,000 felt the same way. People who bought it 10,000 felt the same way. Just in terms of the adoption curve, we're clearly very, very early. One other observation I'll have is, like, you can look at, say, tech companies. And a feeling that even I had in 2000, was it 2009, 2008, sometime around there, the tech companies were big companies. They were worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And I was like, man, how are these companies going to get any bigger than this? They're like massive companies. And over the next decade, they 10x'd. Uh, that like Google went from being like a $200 billion company to a $2 trillion company, or ballpark $2 trillion. And there was still so much growth ahead, and they were much more later stage than Bitcoin is. I think Bitcoin still has 100x in it. So I still think we're incredibly early. And if something has 100x, you're still at the starting line, essentially. You're still at that first 1%, first step of the total value that's going to be captured. It's just that's the reason people feel like they're late is because of path dependence. They see the prior history of the price, and that's what determines for them like whether they're getting in early or late. It's only in hindsight that they're like, oh, I get it. I got in early. The one piece of advice I give people is that if you can accumulate Bitcoin during a bear market, you will do well, because and for two reasons. One is that the price is just like, it's the optimal time to accumulate because the price has collapsed from an all-time high. But also the mentality of people who come in at a bear market is, I believe in this. I'm investing slowly and accumulating because I have conviction in it, and I realize that there's something fundamentally better about Bitcoin than its competitors. And those people, in my experience, stay. They realize Bitcoin's important and they stay for the long term. They stay through the price swings. It's the people who come in at the end of a bull market that, like, they turn out to be paper hands, and they have the worst experience because they buy near the top, the price crashes, they feel awful, they abandon Bitcoin, they sell it. A lot of people sell it all. Like, I still remember stories of people selling all of their Bitcoin at $2. Actually, I heard one from someone, an old-time Bitcoiner at Swan, who had accumulated a bunch of Bitcoin and sold their Bitcoin at $2 because they thought, oh man, this thing is doomed, it's never coming back. And it dropped from $30 to $2 in the Mt. Gox crash. And this was true for this person too, whenever a person goes through that experience, what I find is they don't come back to Bitcoin for at least another 1 or 2 cycles. And it's so painful for them because they look back and they're like, I had this opportunity to be part of this thing and to accumulate it when it was at such a great price. But because they came in at the end of the bull market, they were so affected by the market psychology and the pain of losing money that they didn't want to think about Bitcoin for like a few cycles after that. And then because it survived for a few more cycles, they're like, oh, maybe I should revisit Bitcoin and consider investing in it again when the price is like 100x higher than it was. So yeah, I think my advice is for your listeners is now is a perfect time to accumulate Bitcoin. There's been so much negativity. The price went below 20,000, and today we're learning why it went below 20,000 with the FTX court case, and how FTX was literally stealing Bitcoins of their customers and selling those Bitcoins to keep their hedge fund Alameda afloat. So there's this huge crime that happened, and one of the side effects of the crime is Bitcoin dipped below 20,000, which most people, including me, did not expect. Like, this is the first, just like you said, Nico, this is the first cycle where Bitcoin has dropped below its previous all-time high. And that was really surprising. Most of us thought that's probably not going to happen. That would be a really extreme event. And now we know why that extreme event happened. It happened because of a massive criminal enterprise which stole billions of dollars and force sold people's Bitcoin onto the market. If it wasn't for that criminal enterprise, then Bitcoin probably wouldn't have gone below its previous all-time high.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. And then also, not to mention the fact that the China ban happened. And I mean, and a lot of people don't realize this because I'm sure they weren't paying attention. But essentially, when the CCP banned Bitcoin mining again, I think it was like the 18th time. They did it right in the middle of the last bull run, and you see the hash rate drop, and you see the price drop with it. And that's essentially all that sell pressure from those miners that are selling their equipment, selling their infrastructure, selling Bitcoin to relocate to a friendlier jurisdiction. And then you lump in the FTX stuff, right? You know, selling that paper Bitcoin, selling the investors Bitcoin. It was like this like perfect storm that all kind of happened at once. And I truly believe we were meant to hit 100K. Like I really do believe we were meant to hit 100K last cycle. And I think it was just all the perfect storm of things that needed to happen in order for Bitcoin not to hit 100K. Now, maybe this is like a bit of hopium. Maybe I'm like, too optimistic and whatnot. But what I'm seeing this cycle is a lot of pessimism about the next cycle. Actually, people are like they're like, oh, maybe it's gonna hit 80K, maybe it's gonna hit 75K. We'll be lucky if it hits that. So it's kind of the exact opposite of the language and the excitement that I heard the last cycle. And I think this cycle is going to be really interesting because you have the BlackRock spot ETF, right? The halving is ensuring, that the sell pressure from the miners is going to get cut in half no matter what. And at the end of the day, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So if another billionaire or if another public company sees what Michael Saylor is doing, it's clearly working the strategy that he's adopted. And they wanted to do the same thing. There's literally not enough Bitcoin to go around. And I think people have a hard time really wrapping their heads around this absolute scarcity that Bitcoin has. Like if every company wanted to adopt the MicroStrategy, I love how they have strategy in the name, the MicroStrategy strategy, they literally could not. It would make the price go parabolic. There would be not enough Bitcoin to go around, right? So what are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
yeah, the price has to expand to make room for new entrants. That's the way you can get more people into Bitcoin. Is the price and the liquidity has to expand. But you're right. There's only like a very small fraction of Bitcoin is actively traded, and I think it was I saw this on I think it was on Twitter. Unchained published a note about how we're at the all-time high for long-term held Bitcoin. The fraction of the total supply that's been held by people for more than 2 years is the highest it's ever been in the history of Bitcoin. The previous all-time was 2016, which was the beginning of that bull market into the end of 2017. And it's a really good sign that all of the Bitcoin that was held by paper hands in this last cycle has been accumulated. It's all been pulled off the market, and now we have a bunch of diamond hands holding Bitcoin. Um, it's almost like a dry forest, and all you need is that match, and things are going to go crazy very, very quickly. Uh, the other comment you made, I think is really important about how sentiment is really negative and how people are like, oh, this cycle's not going to go very far. We'd be lucky if we just get above the all-time high. I think that's fantastic. I love seeing sentiment like that coming into a new bull market, especially when the price has plateaued and continued negative news and sentiment can't push Bitcoin down. That to me is a sign of a very, very strong base and a very strong set of hands holding Bitcoin. I think it certainly sets us up well for the next bull market. One extra thing I wanted to say, though, one of the factors in the perfect storm you mentioned that I think is incredibly important, and probably I think the most important, was the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve increased interest rates at the fastest pace in probably 40 years after a period of 15 years, about 15 years of zero interest rates. They switched directions. So, this period of like free money for 15 years, and then they flip the switch and they go basically parabolic on short-term interest rates. I think that's probably the number one factor that shut the Bitcoin bull market down in 2021. And if the halving corresponds or, roughly corresponds to the Fed pivoting, at some point, I think the Fed has to pivot because they're going to break the economy. If the halving and the Fed pivot happen around the same time, then I think this bull market could be much bigger than people think.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I agree with that statement completely. What blows my mind, VJ, is, like they talk about how the US is this capitalistic society, and it is like the shining, economy on the hill. And you could say that, right? It's the most powerful economy by far in the US. I mean, the world. Um, but you could make the case that it is a centrally planned in a way. I know I'm going to get ripped for that, but in a way, you have this guy in a suit that basically gets to dictate the direction of the U.S. economy. It's a form of central planning. I mean, they don't even hide it in a way. They do call he does call himself chairman, so it's Chairman Powell, dictating. And if you know a little bit about history and whatnot, right? Central planning doesn't have a good track record, especially when it comes to everything, really. But what are your thoughts about that? Because it's absolutely insane. And VJ, just to kind of add to that, give a little bit of context to our viewers, and I'm sure you guys know by now, my career, I went straight into Bitcoin. So I had to learn the traditional financial system rather than what most people go through is they go from the traditional financial system and then they reach Bitcoin and then they have to go through this unlearning process. I had to go through, I understood Bitcoin, and then to not sound like an idiot when I bring Greg Foss on the show, I had to go back in time or look back and try to understand the traditional financial system. And it just blows my mind. I'm like, this is so archaic. This is absolutely insane. This is absolutely bonkers. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny. You had to go and learn the fiat standard because you were born with the Bitcoin standard. I think that I feel jealous actually when you say that. It reminds me of when I hear people who were homeschooled, and I'm like, oh man, that sounds so nice. Like to not grow up in the fiat system, to not grow up with that mindset. Like it's like being born outside the Matrix. That movie from 1999, which I think there's a lot of parallels. You're one of those people who are like,
Doesn't have the holes in the back of his
yeah, you
head.
don't have the hole in the back of your neck, and you understand like what the world is and what the truth is. I think that's really cool. Um, yeah, I think we can almost feel lucky that they don't call the chairman the czar, like the the czar of money. You're right. The interesting thing about the US economy is it's a mixed economy. It is capitalistic in many ways. And the measure of whether an economy is capitalistic that was given by von Mises was whether there's a functioning stock market. So I think we are capitalist in that sense. But money is the most important economic good in any economy because it's half of every transaction. And you're right, we have central planning, we have communism for money, for the most important economic good. And that can't help but have all sorts of unintended consequences. And the problem is the Fed, as much as they may have good intentions, they really veer from one side to the other, and it's just really whiplashes the economy. Like with the pandemic, they just created so much helicopter money. They were like trying to protect the economy. But what's the consequence of that? Now we have inflation, and it looks like that inflation is kind of sticky. It's really hard to get rid of it because they pumped all this money into the economy, and it's really hard to drain it out because it's painful. It's almost like putting a lot of heroin into a heroin addict. The process of withdrawal is not pleasant, and that's what they're trying to do. You're trying to get the patient to go through withdrawal, but you're also trying to make sure the patient doesn't die. And that's possible as well. If they push interest rates too high, the patient could flatline and die. Certainly, parts of the economy have already died. Like if you look at the real estate market in the US, it's dead. It is in a state of stasis that has never been seen in the last century. Like the
Wait,
number of home sales.
what do you mean by that though? Because I live in South Florida and it's
Yeah.
absolutely bonkers down here. So what do you mean by that? By
Well,
stasis?
prices are high. Prices are high, that's true, but inventories are incredibly low. Like, it's a kind of a
Mm.
fake market where, like, the prices that are being set don't really reflect what a real market would have a normal number of sales, but because interest rates are so high and because prices haven't gone down, it's so expensive to buy a house. Like to get a mortgage to buy a house is, out of the realm of possibility for most people now. But on the other hand, people who own a home don't want to sell it because it's like, well, I don't know if I can sell it. Maybe in Florida, maybe there are a few pockets in the country where you can sell a home. But in most places, if you look at the data, the number of home sales, new home sales, is the lowest it's been in a century. This is essentially as close to a dead housing market as you can get. Uh, so there are parts of the economy that have died, and they've died because of the Fed. The Fed is intervening in this direction. On the one hand, they pumped in heroin during the pandemic, and now they've pulled out the heroin, and parts of the patient have died. The real estate market is one. The question is whether that, spreads to the core parts of the body. Like, is the heart of the economy going to stop? That's what I think would cause the Fed to change its course and pivot and reduce interest rates again. If we enter a recession, as I think we will in 2024, I think the Fed will pivot, and that's perfect timing for when the halving happens as well.
And okay, so that's really interesting because and I've been talking, really privileged to have like Lawrence and the macro heavyweights, like I like to call them, Lavish, Lynn, and like my question to them is like we've been expecting this recession and it's just not, it hasn't come to fruition yet. So what you're saying is you're expecting you're expecting it to come in 2024. Why do you think it's taken so long? Why has this been such a drawn out process?
Well, parts of the economy are already in recession. It's kind of a tale of two different sectors. Um, like the real estate market is in a deep, deep recession, like unprecedented recession. But then the services sector is still booming. A lot of that money that was printed and created during the pandemic went into like it was like directly helicopter dropped, almost like these stimulus checks people had this extra cash, but they were prevented from doing anything with it because we're all locked up for 2 years. uh, and so when that stopped, people had this desperate desire to like get out and do stuff, to go to restaurants, to go to Disneyland, to travel. And all of that money is being flushed into the services sector right now. And so that sector is being propped up and has been propped up probably for a year or so. But now credit card debt is increasing, and people have spent that money that they got and they're going into debt. Eventually, that won't be sustainable. And then the services sector will also go into recession. It's just this sort of slow moving train wreck where parts of it, of the train, have been hit by the recession, but the back end of the train is still moving forward. And the back end of the train is the services sector, which is, all these restaurants keeping up with this massively elevated demand because of, one, the money that went directly to consumers, and two, the pent up demand from people wanting to live their lives. That's not going to last forever.
Yeah. No, eventually, what's the expression? The roosters come home or something like that. I don't know. The chicken comes home to
Yeah,
roost. I guess that's the
yeah.
expression.
The
And
chickens come home to roost.
boom. All right. Anyways, okay.
I have chickens, so I should know that.
Oof, you have chickens? I need to get on that tip. Unfortunately I live in a nice box. But I live in an apartment. So no, I mean I could put them in the balcony. I don't know how my fiance would feel about that, but
They're pretty messy. This is an interesting fact. I was surprised how many swans, our fellow coworkers, have chickens. There's even like a Slack channel just for people who own chickens,
it's
which they very
it's
kindly invited me to, even though I only have 2 chickens.
it's a movement. It's a movement. You have to own a chicken. There's something about being a Bitcoiner that that's kind of part of the proof of work.
Free eggs, man.
Yeah, so I don't know how my building would feel or how my fiance would feel, but maybe just one chicken to see how it goes. And
I want one thing I would warn you: if you're gonna go down the chicken rabbit hole, which you're right, Bitcoin is like going down the chicken rabbit hole. We bought 4 chickens when they were baby chicks, and 2 of them turned out to be roosters, and that's kind. that's kind of problematic because in the city, and I'm sure this is true in Florida as well, especially if you're in an apartment building, they do not like roosters because they're very loud. And unfortunately, those two guys, they had to go.
Wait, so did you crack the neck yourself?
I did not. We had a friend who was happy to take them and turn them into dinner.
Okay, that's a very nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
Well, may they rest in peace, the
Yes.
roosters and the roosters. Okay, so VJ, back to bullish case for
You
Bitcoin,
didn't
because
expect that, did you?
no, I
The
mean
chicken,
I've been
chicken
doing
rabbit hole.
I've been doing this for so long that now I'm prepared to be prepared for the unexpected when talking to Bitcoiners. So, but it is a pleasant surprise. It is a pleasant surprise that the author of the bullish case for Bitcoin is also a chicken farmer. That's some good news. That's some good news
That's my
for sure.
that's my next book, The Bullish Case for Chickens.
The bullish case for chicken. The bullish case for chickens is Bitcoin takes over the world, because then more Bitcoiners equals more chicken farmers. So you could say they're definitely correlated, the two. Anyways, so going back to the bullish case for Bitcoin, if you were to write it today, would you do it differently?
Interesting. I No, I don't think I would. I I think when I wrote it, um, I wrote it in a way that I thought would be timeless. That the arguments I was making was not. I was really actually pretty conscious about not saying anything specific about the period of time that I was writing in. It was more an article about money. Why does money have value, and why, if money has value for certain attributes that we use it for, then why is Bitcoin superior to what we have already? And I think those arguments are fairly timeless. So I don't think I would. Maybe there's extra topics I would like to cover if I do a new edition of the book that people might be interested in, like how do you custody Bitcoin? How do you obtain Bitcoin? Those are questions. A lot of people come to my book as beginners. It's often used by people to give to beginners who don't know much about Bitcoin as an introduction. And I think one thing Bitcoiners often want to know is like, well, how do I actually get any Bitcoin? Well, now I can feel really excited about saying go to Swan, um, which is actually, I think that's a big deal. That's maybe one thing we can talk about for a second. I think in the early days, people sent their friends and family to Coinbase because it was the only option. And I think for a lot of Bitcoiners or people who are really passionate about Bitcoin, it's such an uncomfortable feeling to send friends and family to a place you know is not going to do the right thing by your friends and family, that are going to expose them to things that are going to cause them financial harm and encourage gambling, and are not really investment vehicles. They're just complete garbage scams. A lot of them are complete scams. And the only reason that a company like Coinbase offers it is because they make fees on it. They make money if people trade back and forth. They're not doing it for the right reason. So it's really exciting for me to now be in a period of time when we have companies that are committed to not doing that and to educating people about why Bitcoin is different, why it's special, why it's a new thing in the world that can help the world. And now I can feel comfortable about, if I write a new book, like, go to Swan. You can buy Bitcoin at Swan. They'll help you out. They'll give you material to educate you on why Bitcoin's important. They'll help you with custody even. Swan is working on this Vault product. So that's really exciting. I don't feel like when I first started writing the article or the book, I really had anything that I could point people to and say, I feel really good about you going to this place to get Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like you're seeing this emphasis on Bitcoin only products. Like so it's like Swan, Unchained, um, River, right? It's like these companies that have built themselves up being Bitcoin only, right? And that wasn't a thing. That was not a thing in 2017. It was the shitcoin casinos, is where, like I like to call them, is where you would find, where you could buy Bitcoin. So it'd be Coinbase, it would be, Binance, Gemini, Kraken, right? Just to name a few, that would offer these altcoins. And what a lot of them do, not all of them, but what a lot of them do is that they list Bitcoin like all the rest, right? So if you're new, and you're downloading one of these, one of these apps, or you're going to one of these websites and you're signing up to one of these exchanges, uh, you're looking at it and you're like, oh, like, whatever coin they're just the same. And I could buy more of this whatever coin because, if people have unit bias, right? And, they kind of equate the two. And this is why I love Swan's approach, where it's an education focus, education first, right? They spend a lot of resources on just, creating content to educate the masses of, why Bitcoin is different. I completely agree. Very, very different times. Where do you see it 5 years from now? Where do you see it 5, 10 years from now? Like, clearly, we were very lucky to start Simply Bitcoin in the beginning of Bitcoin media, really Bitcoin only media is around that time, 2020. I know the OG podcasters started in like 2017, 2018, but it was around that time where Bitcoin only media really took off, because if you look at, YouTube, it's just inundated with, altcoiners and, okay, content creators, you want to do what you want to do, but, Bitcoiners really never had a voice, until not that long ago. Like, this is a new thing. This is a new phenomenon. So where do you see it 5, 10 years from now? Do you see the Bitcoin industry, the Bitcoin only industry, continuing to blossom, continuing to differentiate itself from the rest of the industry? Or do you see the altcoin industry growing with the Bitcoin industry as well?
Unfortunately, I don't think altcoins will go away, because I think the human desire to gamble that's just part of our species, and that's not going to go away. I do think, in terms of, I really, I'm super excited about how successful Swan has been on the media side of things, and Swan is crushing it. It's absolutely crushing it. Like, with the podcasts that are associated with Swan, like what you're doing, what Stefan Livera is doing, but Swan, its own like work, that the Swan specific media is doing really, really well on YouTube. And I think that's so cool, because it's this, it's double benefit of like helping the Bitcoin community, but also being good for the company and bringing people into the company, recognizing that, hey, I've learned about Bitcoin on this video. Who's the company? Oh, it's Swan. Oh, they also provide a service for buying Bitcoin. So I think I'm really excited that Swan is doing that and has taken that approach. I think Corey has been really mindful about doing that and building a Bitcoin brand by having a set of very strong values that Bitcoiners, hardcore Bitcoiners, they associate with that, and they believe in those values. So that has the benefit of attracting people to Swan, both in terms of like employees, but also, bringing customers in, because the people who care about Bitcoin now have a place to recommend their friends and family go to. In terms of the industry, I think Bitcoin's monetization is gonna be the tide that raises all boats. So if you are doing something, if you're employed in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin 10xing is going to have a very big impact on your life and career. Like, your podcast is going to be like Joe Rogan level, in 5, 10 years from now, because you were so early on. And the number of people who care about Bitcoin is going to be like also 10x bigger. So I think that's going to be true for all the companies in this space, especially the Bitcoin only companies. So I'm super excited for that as well, just to be working in this space, not just to see the price rise, but to see the industry as well rise with it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of been the theory of the case, right? Which is whether it's Bitcoin media or Bitcoin only companies, we're still in the very, very first innings of Bitcoin adoption. So it's like, it's truly is kind of like a game. And so I tell this to Opti all the time, who's currently backstage right now. I'm like, it is a game of survival. It is like surviving, surviving the grind, making it over the finish line. Because, if we're right about this thing, and I think we all are, as people that work at Swans, as Bitcoiners, uh, we all believe that, Bitcoin is going to take over the world. Bitcoin is the best money. Bitcoin's going to become the next global reserve currency. I think we truly believe that in our hearts. So, and if we are right about that, there's definitely going to be a whole lot more people that are going to want Bitcoin only financial services or Bitcoin media. Like that's just a fact, right? Whether that's 10x, 100x. But my question to you, Vijay, is so, the 10x, right? A 10x Bitcoin would put it at 250,000, right? So last cycle, I think the 2017 cycle, it went from, I think it was like $300 and went all the way up to $20,000, right? So there's like multitudes more than that 10x. How long is it going to take for Bitcoin to 10x from this $26,000 level? Or is that something that's, something that's achievable next cycle? Is that something that's achievable by 2030? What are your expectations? What are you looking on the horizon? And I know that this is dubious speculation. I know that we're speculating at the moment, and I know maybe I'm pushing you into a corner, but just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say firstly that I do think it's possible that Bitcoin gets to 250,000 in the next cycle. I'm not very good at predicting where the cycles go. Like the 2017 cycle, when Bitcoin went from like what did you say, around $300 or whatever it was, $200 all the way up to
20K.
20,000. Um, I didn't. I did not think that that was going to happen at the time. That blew me away. I thought Bitcoin was going to get to maybe 3, 4, 5,000, and when it got past that, I was really shocked. So sometimes I'm too conservative, but then in the last cycle, I was too optimistic. I did really believe that Bitcoin would get to 100,000 or more than 100,000, and I think because of the perfect storm that we've talked about, that was the reason it didn't get to 100,000. So I do think 250,000 possible. I don't like making predictions, but one thing I do say to people is over the time span of about a decade, I have a lot of confidence, very high conviction that Bitcoin will surpass gold. And gold is worth, I think, 12 trillion right now. And Bitcoin is worth like maybe a half a trillion. So that's like 25x from where we are now. Uh, when that happens exactly, I feel very confident that that's going to happen over the next decade. I don't know what the exact timing will be, but it'll be one of those, like Parker Lewis says, you had him on before, gradually, then suddenly. It will surprise people when it happens because that S part of the adoption curve, where it's really steep and really quick, will just happen. And people are like, whoa, where did that come from? Does that happen 2 years from now, 5 years, 7 years? I don't know. But I believe if you have a long enough time horizon, like 10 years, Bitcoin is still one of the best investments you could ever make, especially because I think the risk profile is so much lower today than it was, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Bitcoin's not going to die. It's gotten to the point where its survival is essentially guaranteed. It's just a question of when do people realize that? When do people realize that this is not going away, and this is not? It's like tamper-resistant money. When will that realization occur to the rest of the world's population? It's impossible to tell, but I think over a period of a decade, you can pretty safely say most people will have figured it out.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that these next 10 years, as fiat currencies continue to break, and this is why I'm so bullish on the global south, like countries like Argentina, Venezuela, Turkey, Nigeria, African countries where they don't have the privilege to have stable fiat currencies. So what do? They start seeking alternatives, right? And then what's bad news for governments is that once they find the alternative, because there truly is really one. I know a lot of them. I know a lot of developing countries are really big into stable coins, but I think stable coins are just, they provide a false sense of financial sovereignty. They don't offer what Bitcoin offers. So I think that's a stopgap. I think that's a foot in the door. I think eventually all roads lead to Bitcoin. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the I think people are slowly waking up to this reality because they don't have that. Like if you're in Argentina and you're dealing with more than 100% inflation, it's not why, me or you, like we're in the West and we're like, yeah, F the Fed, like you go down that rabbit hole. You're like, the money's broken. You can even say it's an ideological stance, right? But the reality is that if you truly wanted to get by, even though it's not an ideal system, we do have very well developed financial rails. You can get by on dollars, even though it sucks, right? But you can still live, right? If you're in Argentina and you're dealing with 100% plus inflation, that does not work anymore. Like that is, you're not seeking an alternative for ideological reasons or because you believe the money is broken. You're seeking an alternative to survive. And what bigger incentive is there than survival, right? So, and I think that's why you see such like crazy adoption rates in those countries. So I do agree. I think 10 years is, a lot of things could happen in 10 years. That famous saying, right? A lot of people, overestimate what they can do in a year, and then they underestimate what they can do in 10, right? So 10 years is a very, very long time. My question to you, Vijay, is the hostility coming from the established players, whether that's the IMF, the United Nations, the current Biden administration. I had Caitlin Long on the show, and she told me, these are her words, not mine, and I was shocked when she told me this. She said that the reason that her bank Custodia got denied a federal banking charter was because that order came directly from the Biden administration, came directly from the White House. Those are her words. I'm like, holy cow. So what would your response to that be, right? You have a lot of people in government that benefit from this tremendous privilege of being able to create money for free that everyone else has to work for. Obviously, they're not going to be very happy if they lose that privilege. And, they've been making some moves to kind of isolate the industry or try to kneecap it. What would your response be to that?
Biden administration is in particular pretty hostile to Bitcoin. They're not going to be there forever, and I think that will change in time. I think like there are certain industries which are just naturally hostile to Bitcoin, like the banking sector, as you mentioned. And I don't think that's going to change. But I think one of the biggest narratives that's causing the wider population to be skeptical about Bitcoin is the environmental narrative. And I honestly think that narrative is going to flip, and it's going to flip big time in the next year. I think BlackRock coming along and promoting Bitcoin and them being an ESG company and the recognition that Bitcoin's actually really good for the environment, like the effect it has on energy grids and load balancing and carbon capture. That's one thing people don't really understand, is that there are Bitcoin mining companies out there. There's a small startup called Giga Energy, which I think people should look up. They're going out and they're capturing methane that would otherwise be flared and burnt into the atmosphere. Methane's like 80 times more damaging to the atmosphere than carbon. So it's hugely impactful to capture that and then turn it into money. So the rate at which they're capturing is much, much more efficient than if you flare that methane. So I think people are going to figure this out. And I think with like a company like BlackRock coming in and getting an ETF approved, which I think will happen eventually, I think that combination is going to flip the narrative on. We're going to start seeing articles from mainstream media, I think, in the span of the next year or so, where they're like, Bitcoin's good for the environment. And people will be shocked. They'll be like, whoa, where did that come from? But mark my words, that's going to change. And I think that's going to change the view of a lot of people in the wider population about Bitcoin.
Yeah, 100%. And you touched upon that, right? Where this idea of where this otherwise wasted energy, right? Because that's what they do. They flare it out into the atmosphere. Now you could turn that into money, right? And that not only applies to flaring natural gas, but that also applies to this tremendous amount of excess electrical capacity that happens to be in stranded locations where that energy would go to waste. You can't transport over long distances. You can't store it efficiently. So what are you going to do with it? And it reminds me of this article that came out in Forbes, actually. And the name of the article, the headline was, "The Kingdom of Bhutan has been secretly mining Bitcoin for years." And if you look at Bhutan, it has this tremendous amount of hydroelectric capacity, right? And they were powering their entire nation, but they had too much of it. So what they realized, it led to the inevitable conclusion. Wait a second, we can make this into Satoshis. We actually have very cheap electricity. We can mine Bitcoin with this. So yeah, it's extremely exciting. And I think it's going to present opportunities to otherwise isolated communities that had no opportunities. And all of a sudden, because they have this stranded energy sources, they could become the new mining towns of the West, where like these mining towns would just pop up in like Colorado and Utah. Now they're ghost towns, but they would pop up because of the gold mining industry. There's this giant gold rush. So yeah, man, it's a very, very exciting future. Corey calls it the bright orange future. And yeah, I totally agree, man. It's very exciting.
I think it's really cool, that idea that you're talking about. It's going to provide the financial incentive to develop these communities in ways that you could have societies just spring out of nowhere in places that otherwise it would be very uneconomic to go there. But because there's an energy source, then you can mine Bitcoin and you can create this like new community of colonists, essentially, that colonize a new part of the world that otherwise would be like, well, we can't go there. It's too expensive to go there. We don't have enough of a financial incentive to build up an infrastructure there. But if you have like this supply of energy, whether it's a volcano or it's geothermal, or you have a hydroelectric dam, or you have some source of energy, then you could have these remote places turn into really vibrant societies.
100%. It really kind of, it brings opportunity where before there was none. Anyways, Vijay, I want to be respectful of your time. We are getting to the top of the hour. I absolutely love this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on Simply Bitcoin IRL. I think you've been the first guest in a couple weeks. So we really do appreciate it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online and any projects that you're working on these days?
You can find me at Twitter, real_VJ on Twitter. I guess the project I'm working on is Swan. I am now a Swan. I'm working as an engineer. I'm working on the Vault team. We launched our product at Pacific Bitcoin. It's a multi-sig solution that helps people custody their own Bitcoin, but we don't dump you into the deep end. We kind of hold your hand through that whole process, make it super easy and smooth to get a multi-sig solution. And we keep one of the keys. There you go. There's the video. I think it's a really fantastic product. We're rolling it out slowly just to make sure there aren't any kinks in the UI. The underlying custody part is really solid, but we want to make sure the UI is really easy to understand and beautiful. So we're rolling it out slowly, but it should be available to all customers of Swan, hopefully fairly shortly.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I remember we have been working on that for quite a while, and it's really nice to have it rolled out and you to be part of the team. And it's a superstar team. Holy cow. Anyways, Vijay, thank you so much for joining us on Simply Bitcoin IRL. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back for the live show tomorrow, 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you enjoyed the content, smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like we provided you value. But we'll catch you on the next one. Peace out, everybody.